The turkey was still warm on my plate when my daughter-in-law leaned down to fill my water glass, brought her mouth close to my ear, and whispered 4 words. "Your room is already packed." Then she straightened up, set down the pitcher, and asked my son if he wanted more stuffing. I didn't move. I didn't drop my fork or turn my head. I sat there with both hands flat on the table, that wobbling table nobody else wanted to sit at, and I let the noise of the kitchen keep going around me like I hadn't heard a thing. My grandson Cody was under the table doing something to the dog. Michael was pouring wine and laughing at his own joke. Vanessa was already halfway to the stove. And I understood, sitting very still in that warm room, that I had 5 days left before they made me disappear. My name is Walter Hensley. I was 68 years old that November, and to understand why a whisper could stop a man's heart, you have to know how I ended up in that chair. My wife Ellen died 2 years before. Pancreatic. There's no soft way to say it, so I won't try. We'd run a hardware store together for 31 years. She did the books. I worked the counter. And every night we walked the 2 blocks home, and she'd tell me who'd come in and what they were really there for. "A man buys hinges," she'd say, but he came in because his wife left and he had nowhere else to be. Ellen saw underneath people. In 38 years, she never once made me feel like I was in the way. Then one October morning, I reached across the bed the way I'd done for 38 years, and the sheet was cold and made up neat because she'd been in a hospital a week, and I understood I was alone for the first time in my adult life. Vanessa took charge after the funeral. She was gentle about it. "I shouldn't be rattling around that big house alone," she said. "The stairs were dangerous. I was forgetting things. Ellen would have wanted me looked after. She said all of it kindly, and I was drowning, and I took the hand she offered without asking what it would cost. Within months, she'd sold the store for me and started handling the rest. The house was being sold too, I was told, though the sale kept stalling. Paperwork, she said. Title delays. Just a formality. I didn't understand any of it, and I didn't try to. The money was going into a joint account to keep things simple, so I'd never have to worry again. And I didn't worry. That was the whole trouble. A man who stops paying attention is a man handing over his keys, and I handed mine over one signature at a time. I moved into the guest room a year after Ellen died. At first it wasn't bad. Cody was 9 and still wanted a grandfather. We built balsa wood airplanes on weekends, and I taught him to sand the edges the way my father taught me. But things changed the way water finds the low places. Vanessa started bringing me papers to sign, for the accountant, for the refinance, for this and that. My things started leaving the room. A box of Ellen's letters went to storage. My tools, 30 years of good tools, got carried to a garage and then sold at a yard sale nobody told me about until it was over. I want to be honest with you, because this is not a story about a wise old man who saw it all coming. I didn't. I told myself I was being useful. I told myself Michael's silence was just exhaustion. I made excuses for all of it, because I was afraid that if I looked straight at it, I'd have to admit how small I'd let myself become. Ellen used to say the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves to keep the peace. I was fluent in them by then, but the whisper changed that, because 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I'd overheard Vanessa on the phone, using a careful, lowered voice, saying the name of a place. Cedar Grove. I hadn't thought much of it then. Now, with her breath still warm against my ear and the water sweating in my glass, it landed. Cedar Grove was a facility, 40 miles away. My room was packed because they weren't going to ask me. They were going to drive me there after the holiday, walk me in, and come home to a quieter house. She'd whisper it the way you tell a child a vacation is over, because she was certain, completely certain, that I'd do what I always did. Nod, look away, sign the paper, be sensible. And sitting there, for the first time in 2 years, I felt something come up through the grief that wasn't grief at all. I looked down the table at my son, who wouldn't meet my eyes, at my grandson on the floor, who was going to grow up believing this is what you do to the people who raised you, at the empty chair where Ellen should have been. I set down my glass. I stood up slow, one hand on the wobbling table. "Beautiful dinner, Vanessa," I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. I'm going to step outside for some air. And I walked onto the back porch in the cold, and I took a card out of my wallet, a card I'd carried since the week Ellen died and never once used, a name she'd made me promise to call. I dialed in the dark, and it rang once, twice, and just as a voice answered on the other end, the porch light snapped on behind me. The sliding door opened, and my son said low and afraid, "Dad, who are you calling?" I kept the phone against my ear. The voice on the line, a woman's, older, steady, said, "This is Margaret Doyle." "Margaret," I said, "it's Walter Hensley, Ellen's husband. I'm sorry to call you on a holiday." A pause. Then, "Walter, I wondered if you ever would." I hung up before Michael could hear the rest. I turned around. My son stood in the doorway with his hands jammed in his pockets, his breath clouding, and for a second he looked exactly like he had at 11, the day he broke his mother's lamp and stood in the hall deciding whether to lie. "An old friend," I said. "Go back inside. Your dinner's getting cold." He didn't move. "She told you." It wasn't a question. "She told me my room is packed." I looked at him. "Is it?" He glanced back through the door at the warm kitchen, at his wife, at his son, and I watched him decide, right there, which man he was going to be. He picked the coward's version. "It's a good place, Dad. It's got a garden." Vanessa toured it twice. "You've been. You left the stove on last month. You're forgetting things. We can't be here all day watching you." And I'll tell you the truth. I wanted to hit him. Not hard, just enough to wake him up. Because I did not leave that stove on. I remember the night. Vanessa asked me to watch her soup while she ran to get Cody, and I stood in that kitchen the whole time. And when she came back, the burner was blazing, and the pot was scorched, and she gasped, "Oh, Walter," and by dinner it was a story about a foggy old man and a flame. I never touched that dial, but you try proving that. You try telling people you're not losing your mind when they've already decided you are. The more you argue, the crazier you sound. That's how the trap is built. Every ordinary mistake becomes evidence, and every truth you tell becomes a symptom. So I didn't argue. I've watched anger work. It hands the other person exactly what they need, which is a reason to call you unstable. Maybe I did leave it on. I said, maybe I didn't. What I know is that nobody asked me. You boxed up my life, and you were going to drive me off, and you were never once going to ask me. Were you? He didn't answer, and that was answer enough. I went back inside and sat down and picked up my fork. "You've outdone yourself, Vanessa," I said, and she blinked, because she'd braced for tears or scene. She gave me a careful smile and said thank you, and we finished dinner. Cody talked about a video game. Michael stared at his plate. Vanessa watched me sideways, the way you watch a dog that growled once and went quiet. I complimented the gravy. Inside my chest, I was colder and clearer than I'd been in years. Margaret Doyle had said, "I wondered if you ever would." Would what? I needed to know. That night, I lay in the guest room, my whole life reduced to 3 boxes in the corner, labeled in Vanessa's neat hand, Walter, Misk, and I thought about the last week of Ellen's life. The morphine had her drifting. But one afternoon she gripped my wrist harder than a dying woman should have been able to, and her eyes were sharp and scared, and she said, "Promise me you'll call Margaret, not for the funeral. After, when you feel small." And I'd said yes, whatever you want, the way you soothe someone you're losing. I thought it was a medicine. Now I wasn't sure it had been the medicine at all. At 5 a.m, before anyone stirred, I did something I'm not proud of. I went into Michael's office and I opened the locked filing cabinet. I knew where Vanessa kept the key, taped under the lip of the desk, because a man who's been made invisible sees everything. And I read. The third folder made me sit down hard, because there was a document with my signature on it, dated 8 months back, on a page I had never seen in my life. Power of attorney. In plain words even a hardware man could follow, it said I had signed away every decision I had left, medical, financial, all of it, to Vanessa. And beneath my forged name, on the witness line, was a signature. I read the name printed under it, and my hand went cold around the paper, because it was a name I saw once a month, and it explained every strange thing that had happened to me for a year. Dr. Alan Reynolds, my own doctor, the man who'd been checking my blood pressure and my heart pills for the better part of a year. The man who, at my last 2 visits, had asked me those odd little questions. What year is it, Walter? Who's the president? Count backward from 100 by 7s, and made small notes I never thought twice about. He hadn't been treating me. He'd been building a file. And that turned everything I thought I knew inside out. This wasn't a whisper at a table. It wasn't a garden and some activities and a family doing a hard, kind thing. It was a plan, months old, professional, patient. Somebody had gone to a doctor. Somebody had gathered the notes and forged a signature and packed the boxes so that on the day they drove me off, there'd be a paper to wave at anyone who asked a question. He signed it himself, poor man. He was not well. My hand shook, and it wasn't fear. It was a particular rage of a man who's just realized the people doubting his memory were the ones counting on him to forget. I didn't call anyone. It was barely 6. I did what Cody taught me back when he still liked me. I held my phone over the page and photographed it, then the next page and the one behind it. Account statements, a letter from Cedar Grove confirming an admission date I'd never agreed to, December 2nd, 5 days after Thanksgiving. I put every folder back exactly square and taped the key where it had been. Then I made the coffee, and when Vanessa came down in her robe, I said good morning. And she said good morning, Walter, and neither of us let on that the ground had shifted. Margaret Doyle's office was a brick walk-up downtown with a radiator that clanked. I told the family I had a doctor's appointment, which, in its way, was true. Vanessa offered to drive me, the way she always offered to drive me, because a man who never goes anywhere alone stays small. I said the senior shuttle was already coming. She didn't like it, but she couldn't forbid it without showing her hand. So she smiled and told me be careful. Margaret was 71, silver-haired, quick-eyed. She came around the desk and took both my hands. You look just the way she described you, she said, then caught herself and laughed. Ellen's Walter. Sit down. There are things about your wife you don't know. I told her first. The whisper, the boxes, the forged power of attorney, Reynolds' name on it, the December date. I watched her face while I talked, and she didn't look surprised. She looked like a woman hearing the second half of a story she already knew the first half of. Walter, she said when I finished, how much did Ellen tell you about what she did before she died? Nothing. She was sick. I thought she was resting. She wasn't resting. Margaret opened a drawer and set a folder on the desk between us. My name on the tab, in Ellen's handwriting. She drove here alone, twice, in the worst of it. She said she wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of what happened to you after. I couldn't speak. She knew Vanessa, Margaret went on. She'd watched how that girl worked on Michael for years. She said, and forgive me for repeating it, Walter trusts people. It's the best thing about him, and it's going to get him robbed the day I'm not there to read the fine print. I sat there and thought about my wife spending her last strength driving downtown to build a wall around a man she wouldn't live to see standing behind it. So what did she do? I asked. She stopped trusting the accounts. Everything you two built, the store money, the savings, the house, she moved into a trust before she died, which is why, Margaret said, tapping the folder, that house of yours is never actually sold, no matter what they told you. It couldn't. The title isn't theirs to sign. Every closing they tried has died on the table, and they've been telling you it's paperwork. The stalled sale, the endless delays. It hadn't been paperwork. It had been Ellen, reaching back from 2 years gone to jam the lock. Then they don't own any of it. I said slowly. Not the house. Not most of the money. What they moved out of trust they had no right to touch. And that's a crime, not a transaction. She leaned in. But Walter, a trust protects property. It does not protect a person. It cannot stop a doctor's certification and a locked door. If they get you declared incompetent before we act, none of this paper saves you. Because a man ruled incompetent can't sign, can't file, can't testify. The trust is your wife's half of the rescue. The other half she couldn't do from where she is. That part's yours. Then tell me what to do. I need a second signature to move fast, she said. Ellen didn't leave you to do this alone. She named a co-trustee, someone who's been ready for this call for 2 years. And she turned the last page toward me, and I saw the name, and the room went quiet around me. Not because I was afraid, but because it was the one person I'd spent 6 years being too proud to phone. Catherine Hensley, my daughter. Kate is my oldest, 2 years older than Michael and nothing like him, where he went along to keep the peace. She pushed back on everything from the time she could talk. And 6 years ago, at a dinner that started over nothing, she looked across the table at Vanessa, new to the family then, all charm and lemon cake, and said in front of everyone, I don't know what you're after, but I see you. And I told my own daughter to apologize. I can still feel Ellen's hand tightening on my knee under the tablecloth, try to stop me. I ignored it. Vanessa was crying, Michael was furious, and I wanted the evening to be smooth more than I wanted to be right. So I told Kate she was being cruel and paranoid, and that she owed the girl an apology. She didn't cry. She stood up and looked at me, not angry, just done, and said, When you finally see it, Dad, I hope it's not too late. Then she left. Christmas cards for a year. Then nothing. She moved 2 states away, took a nursing job, built a whole life I knew nothing about, and I let her go because calling her would have meant saying out loud that she'd been right, and a proud, frightened man will pay almost anything to avoid that sentence. What I didn't know, what Margaret told me in that clanking office, was that Ellen never let go of her. Phone calls from the store, from the car, anywhere I wasn't. When Ellen got sick, Kate was the first person she told before me, because Kate was a nurse and Ellen wanted it straight. And it was Kate she named to stand guard over everything because, as she put to Margaret, Kate is the only one who won't blink at Vanessa, and Walter is the only one soft enough to forgive Kate once he understands. I need both of those things to be true, or none of this works. My wife hadn't just built a wall. She'd built a bridge with 2 ends and prayed her husband and daughter would walk toward each other across it before it was too late. I put my face in my hands, and I cried in that office, 68 years old, and not for money. There's a clock on this, Margaret said, gentle but firm. They think you're a confused man with 5 days left. That's the only advantage you have, and it's gone the second they smell a threat. If they realize the trust exists before we've locked the accounts and gotten Kate here to sign beside you, they won't wait for December. They'll move you sooner. Get Reynolds to certify you and put you behind a door where nobody has to listen. So I need to ask you something hard. Can you go home tonight and be exactly the harmless old man they think you are? No scene, no fight, just a few more days of playing the fool. I've been playing the fool for 2 years without trying. I said, I can do it on purpose. But I make the call to Kate. Not you, me. She slid the phone across the desk. I dialed the number in her file, and it rang, and I had 6 years of sentences ready, and not one of them was good enough. Then the line clicked, and a woman's voice, grown, careful, guarded, said, This is Kate. And I couldn't get a word out. I sat there with my mouth open and my heart hammering, and the silence stretched. And finally she said, sharper, Hello? Who is this? And I managed one word. Katie. The quiet that came back down the line was 6 years long. And then, very small, in a voice that cracked clean down the middle, Dad? Neither of us could speak for a moment. Then we both tried at once and stopped, and she laughed, a wet, broken laugh, and said, You first. So I told her, all of it, in order, the way you'd report a fire, the whisper, the boxes, the forged power of attorney, with Reynolds' name on it, the December date, the trust in Margaret, and the fact that I'd just learned her mother had named her to guard me, and I'd been too stubborn for 6 years to know it. She listened without interrupting, which was not the girl I remembered, When I finished, there was a long pause, and then she said something that told me she becomes someone I hadn't earned the right to know yet. I'm not going to say I told you so. A breath. Mom made me promise I wouldn't, if this day ever came. She said you'd be doing enough of that to yourself. I had to put my hand over my mouth. Dad, listen to me. And her voice shifted. The nurse's voice, the one that runs toward the thing everyone else runs from. I have a box in my closet. 6 years of it. Every strange email Vanessa ever sent me. Every date. Every time I wrote down something that didn't add up, because nobody would listen, and I needed to know I wasn't crazy. It's not proof of a crime on its own, but laid next to that power of attorney. It's a pattern. It's motive. It matters. A pause. I'm coming. I'll drive through the night. I can be there tomorrow evening. Kate, don't get in that van, Dad. Whatever they try. Once you're through those doors, they own everything. Your phone, your visitors, your doctors. Stall. Be boring. Give me one more day. And then quieter, not like a nurse at all. You're not doing this by yourself this time. Okay, I said. I rode the shuttle home in the late afternoon, practicing my face in the window. Mild, tired, a little vague, the face they'd cast me in. I had it on tight by the time we pulled up, but something was wrong before I reached the door. There was a white van in the driveway, plain, with a magnetic sign I couldn't read from the curb. The front door was propped open with a shoe, the way you prop it when you're carrying things out. Inside, the 3 boxes from my room, Walter, Misk, weren't in my room anymore. They were stacked by the door. Ready? Vanessa stood in the hall with her phone to her ear. When she saw me, she lowered it and smiled. Oh, good, you're home. There's been a little change of plans. She tucked the phone into her robe. Cedar Grove had an opening come up early. Isn't that lucky? We didn't want you sitting around all anxious. So we thought, why not get you settled comfortable this weekend instead? Behind her, a man in a polo shirt came down the stairs with my old suitcase. We'll leave first thing in the morning. Doesn't that sound nice? Here's what being underestimated teaches you. It's a cage, but it's also a coat you can hide inside, because when people are sure you're weak, they stop watching your hands. So I didn't do the thing every nerve in my body was screaming for. I didn't say I knew about the trust, or Reynolds, or my daughter driving toward me through the dark. I let my shoulders drop. I let my eyes go lost. I gave her the old fool she'd ordered. Tomorrow, I said softly, looking at the boxes like a man looking at pieces of himself. Already? Well, I suppose you know best. And relief moved across her face. Plain as weather. People who think they're the smartest one in the room are the easiest to fool, because they can't imagine being fooled. You'll be so much happier there, she said, and touched my arm. Go rest. I'll bring you a plate. In the guest room, I texted Kate 3 words on the blanket. They moved it. Tomorrow. Her reply came fast. Don't get in the van. I'm driving. Then, a second later, called Margaret. Hold on, Dad. Vanessa brought the plate herself. Turkey again, a small kindness folded inside a large cruelty, which is how these things usually come. She lingered in the doorway. You know I'm not the villain here, she said, and there was something almost tired in it. I gave up years for this family. Years. Someday you'll understand what that costs. And the thing that unsettled me most was that she believed it. In whatever story she told herself at night, she was the one who'd sacrificed, and I was the weight she carried. I ate the turkey. I said, thank you. I waited for the house to go dark. It was past midnight when the knock came. 2 knuckles, soft. I slowed my breathing to fake sleep, but the shape in the doorway was of Vanessa. It was broader, slower. It crossed the room and sat down heavy in the chair by the window, and my son said, in a voice I hadn't heard since he was a boy, I know you're awake, Dad. I opened my eyes. He was turning something over and over in his hands. I found the office unlocked this morning, he said. You put the folders back, but you set the Cedar Grove letter in upside down. A dry, Wretched little laugh. You always did that. Load the dishwasher wrong. Hang the calendar crooked. Mom said you'd survive anything but tidiness. His voice broke. You know, don't you? I stayed quiet. I've learned silence pulls the truth out of a person better than any question. I told myself it was for your own good, he said. That's what she said, and it was easier to believe her than to look straight at it. She handled the doctor, the papers. I just signed where she pointed, same as you. He lifted his head, and his eyes were wet. But there's one page I saw that I wasn't supposed to, and it's not a nursing home. Dad, it's not a garden. He set a folded document on the bed beside me, worn soft from a week of being carried. That van isn't from Cedar Grove, he said. Read where she's really taking you, and then tell me what we do, because once you understand what that place is, you'll know we don't have until morning. I turned on the lamp and unfolded the page my son had been carrying against his chest for a week. It was an admissions contract, but the name at the top wasn't Cedar Grove. It was a Hartley neurological residence, and underneath, in the fine gray print people like Vanessa count on you never reading. Secured memory care, locked cognitive unit, admission by legal guardian or attorney in fact. Attorney in fact. That was the forged power of attorney. That was the whole point of it. Clipped behind the contract was a single page on Reynolds' letterhead, a physician's certification, filled out, signed, and dated for tomorrow. It stated that I, Walter Hensley, suffered advanced cognitive decline, was a danger to myself, and could no longer make my own medical or financial decisions. He'd signed a day early. He'd certified me insane for a day that hadn't happened yet. Now you see it, Michael said quietly. It's a locked ward, Dad. Inside, you're a patient, not a person. No phone unless they allow it. No visitors but family, and legally, that's her. Anything you say about how you got there is just the disease talking. That's what the ward is for. And the second that certification is filed, you can't fight any of it. You can't sign Mom's trust, can't file a report, can't stand up in front of a judge. They don't just take you somewhere. They take away your voice on the way in. And there it was, the shape of the thing Ellen had seen coming from her deathbed. This was never about a bed in a nice facility. It was about silence. A locked door is just the surest way to make certain the truth can't get out. Why tonight, Michael? I asked him, not angry. I needed to know. You've signed her papers for 2 years. He was quiet a long moment. Because last week Cody asked me why Grandpa was going away. And then he asked if, when I got old, he'd have to send me away too. His face came apart. Like it's just what our family does. I looked at him, and I understood that's what I'm teaching him, that the people who love you are things you use up and stack by the door. Mom would be ashamed of me, and I've been too much of a coward to be ashamed of myself. Ellen used to say people don't change for their own sake. They change for whoever's watching them. She was right, the way she was almost always right. All right, I said, and my voice came out level, the voice I used in the store when a shipment came in wrong and had to be fixed before we opened. Then we don't wait for morning. I told him everything Margaret had told me. The trust his mother built that neither he nor Vanessa knew existed. The house that had never legally sold. His sister, driving through the night this minute, named to stand beside me. And the certification, the one thing that could still sink all of it, which could not, under any circumstance, leave this house and reach Hartley. I watched my son learn, in the space of a few minutes, that his mother had loved him enough to protect him even from himself, because that same trust shielded him from the crime his wife had signed him into. He pressed his hand over his mouth. Where's the original, Michael? I asked. Not your copy. The one she means to carry in tomorrow. He went still. The fireproof box in her closet. She's the only one with the key. And then his eyes came up to mine, and we both went cold at the same instant, because down the hall, through the dark of the sleeping house, we heard a door open, footsteps, and Vanessa's voice, wide awake, no warmth left in it at all. Michael, who are you talking to in there? The footsteps came fast, and the door swung open, and the overhead light snapped on hard enough to hurt. Vanessa stood in the doorway in her robe, and the hostess was gone. What stood, there was a person who'd always been underneath, quick, cold, already counting. Her eyes went from Michael in the chair, to me sitting up in bed, to the papers spread on the blanket between us. The Hartley contract, Reynolds certification, her whole machine, laid out in the light. She read the room in about 2 seconds. And she made a choice to keep playing the hand. "Michael, come to bed," she said, in the reasonable voice, the one for the neighbors. "Your father needs his rest. Big day tomorrow." She didn't even look at the papers. She was betting we hadn't understood them. And Michael didn't move. That, more than anything I said, was the moment the floor tilted. Because for 2 years when Vanessa spoke, my son obeyed. Now, he sat still and said one word. "No." Something flickered across her face. "Not guilt. Recalculation. Michael, you said it was Cedar Grove." He picked up the certification with a shaking hand. "This is a locked ward, and this is dated tomorrow. When did Alan sign this?" "Put that down." The reasonable voice slipped. "You don't. You have no idea what I've carried in this house. You don't get to." "When did he sign it, Vanessa?" "It doesn't, that's not." She stopped, started again, and this time it came out low and hard and full of something that had been pressed down a long time. "Do you have any idea what a man like that costs to keep? 10 more years of it? I did what somebody had to do. Nobody else was going to. Not an argument. Not really. Just a story she'd been telling herself. Finally leaking out the seams. I didn't hate her in that moment. I want to be honest about that. Because it surprised me. What I felt was closer to grief. That a person could walk so far down a lonely road that locking a grieving old man behind a door could start to feel like something noble. "There's one problem, Vanessa," I said. It was the first I'd spoken, and they both turned. I set down the book I'd been pretending, all year, to be too foggy to read, and I let the fog fall off my face. I let her see the man who ran a business for 31 years and buried his wife, and had spent 2 years being written off by people who never once checked whether the fool was really a fool. The house you told me you sold was never yours to sell. The money you moved was never in an account you had the right to touch. And that power of attorney, the one Alan witnessed, is worth nothing. Because Ellen locked everything in a trust before she died, and you built your whole plan on top of something you never knew was there. The color left her face. "Kate is the co-trustee," I said. "She's 90 minutes out. And when she gets here, the two of us are going to undo every single thing you've done." Her eyes dropped to the certification in Michael's hand, and I watched her understand the way I did. Filed, it made me powerless. Destroyed, it made her a forger with no shield. Everything hung on that one page. She lunged, not for Michael, past him, for the lamp table, where a book of matches sat in the dish beside the candle Vanessa lit every night. She got them in her hand and struck one and reached for the corner of the certification, because a burned page is no evidence at all, and for one ugly second the three of us were tangled in the lamplight, Michael grabbing her wrist, the match guttering, my own hands closing over the paper, and a small voice cut clean through all of it. "Mom." We froze. Cody stood in the hall in his pajamas. The dog pressed to his leg. He was staring at the match in his mother's hand, at his father gripping her wrist, at me, 9 years old, taking all of it, and in his other hand, he held up her phone, screen glowing. "It kept buzzing," he said, in the careful voice of a child who knows something is wrong, but not what. "So I brought it. There's a man texting you." He looked down and read it the way a kid reads words he doesn't understand. It says, "I want my name off this before somebody calls the police." He looked up. "Mom, who's Dr. Reynolds?" The match went out between Vanessa's fingers. She didn't relight it, because that message changed the shape of everything, and she saw it before we did. A doctor who forges a certification is a criminal. A doctor who texts at midnight begging to pull his name before the police get involved is a man already rehearsing his testimony. A man who, when the pressure comes, will not go down protecting her. He'll go down selling her. The keystone of her plan had just told her, in writing, that he was ready to run. "Cody," she said, and her voice had gone small. "Sweetheart, give me the phone." But Cody looked at his father instead, 9 years old, and he already knew how to check which grown-up to trust by the look on their face. Michael crossed the room and knelt in front of his son and put both hands on his shoulders. "You did exactly right, buddy," he said. "Exactly right. Go on back to bed. Take the dog. I've got this. I promise." And this time, I could hear it. He meant to keep the promise. When the boy was gone, Michael took the phone and the certification from where they'd fallen and put them both in my hands. And by doing it, he told his wife, without a word, where he stood. Vanessa sat down on the edge of the bed, like her legs had quit. She looked, all at once, young and cornered and afraid, and the old softness Ellen had spent 38 years working into me wanted to reach for her. I didn't. Some things a person has to sit inside. Then headlights swept the wall. A car door, fast steps up the walk. The front door opened without a knock, because the shoe still propped it. And a voice I hadn't heard in 6 years, older and surer but unmistakable. "Dad, where are you?" "In here, Katie," I said, and it broke on the second word. She came through the door in a rumpled coat with her keys still in her fist and stopped dead at the sight of us. Me in the bed with the papers, Michael standing guard, Vanessa collapsed and white on the mattress edge. Kate took it all in the way she takes in everything. And then she crossed the room straight past her brother, past the woman she warned me about, and she put her arms around me. 6 years. My daughter held me for the first time in 6 years, and I felt her shaking, and I realized we were both crying. "I'm sorry," I said into her shoulder. "You told me. You looked right at her and you told me, and I made you apologize. To her, in our own house." "Dad." "No. Let me. I chose a quiet dinner over my own daughter. I chose it every day for 6 years by not picking up the phone. That's the thing I have to live with, and I'm not going to pretend away just because you drove all night to save me." She pulled back and looked at me, and her chin was doing the thing it did when she was small and trying not to cry. "You just did it," she said. "You said I was right. Do you know that's all I ever—" She stopped, wiped her face hard with the heel of her hand, and when she spoke again the nurse was back, because that's how Kate keeps standing. "We'll finish that later. I promise we will. Right now we work." She looked at the papers in my lap, and her eyes went sharp and professional as she read. The Hartley contract, the certification, Reynolds' message still glowing on the screen. "Oh, Vanessa," she said, not cruelly, almost sadly, "you have no idea how much of this you got wrong." She turned to me. "Margaret's meeting us at the bank at 9. This," she touched the certification, "and this, the phone, is more than we hope to have. A forged certification, a doctor trying to run, a locked ward set up behind your back. That's not something we survive, Dad. That's something we win." Then she scrolled up the message thread above Reynolds' last text, messages I hadn't reached, and I watched the color drain out of my daughter's face. "Dad," she said slowly, "he mentions Mom." I took the phone and read the older message, dated the spring before, and the room went far away. It was Reynolds to Vanessa after what happened with Ellen. "We can't be sloppy. She saw it coming, and it nearly ended my career. If we do this with the old man, it has to be airtight. After what happened with Ellen." I looked at Vanessa, and she wouldn't look at me. And in that not looking, I read the last of it. It had started with my wife. In those final months, while Ellen was dying and I was too broken to see straight, Vanessa had already gone to Reynolds and begun turning the same machine. The quiet notes, the talk of decline, the position to control the estate before Ellen was even gone. But Ellen was not a hollowed-out man drowning in grief. Ellen saw the hand reaching for her while she still had her wits, and she moved everything into the trust and named our estranged daughter to guard it. And then she gripped my wrist with the last of her strength and made me promise to call Margaret when I felt small. She hadn't been confused that afternoon. She'd been warning me. She knew that once she was gone, they'd come for me the way they'd already come for her. Only this time there'd be no sharp-eyed Ellen at the table to stop it. And I came within one whispered sentence of walking into that van. I need to say that plainly. If Vanessa had kept quiet one more week, I'd been 40 miles away behind a locked door, and every true word out of my mouth would have been filed under symptoms. The only thing that saved me is that she got so certain I was already beaten that she said the quiet part out loud. We didn't sleep. Kate made coffee in the kitchen that still smelled of Thanksgiving. Margaret came a little after 2 with her briefcase, and we sat around the same table where the whisper had happened, and we laid it all out under the lamp, the photographs, the certification, Kate's 6-year box of small documented wrongs, Reynolds' own messages. Vanessa sat apart, saying nothing, watching a thing she'd built for years come apart in a single night. At 9, Kate and I walked into the bank as the 2 living trustees of Ellen's estate. I want to tell you about that, because it's the moment everything turned, and I felt my wife standing behind me the whole time. The manager was a careful young woman who kept saying she'd need authorization, and Margaret slid the trust across the desk, and I watched the woman's face change as she read it. The slow understanding that the accounts frozen in front of her had never lawfully belonged to the people who'd been draining them. She looked up at me, and for the first time in 2 years a stranger looked at me like a man who was in charge of his own life. "Mr. Hensley," she said, "whose name would you like on these accounts?" Such a small sentence. I had to hold the edge of the desk. "Mine," I said, "and my daughter's." By noon it was done, the account secured, the fraudulent transfers flagged, the house title confirmed exactly where Ellen had locked it. Margaret filed the police report and a complaint to the medical board the same afternoon, with Reynolds' midnight message attached. He folded inside a week. Men like that always protect themselves first, and his testimony was a thread that pulled the rest apart. I won't pretend the ending was clean, because nothing real ever is. Vanessa was charged. Forgery, fraud against an elder, conspiracy. She served less time than some thought she should, and more than she believed she deserved. And to this day, she has never once said she did anything but sacrifice for her family. I've stopped needing her to say otherwise. You cannot force a person to see herself, and I decided I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life waiting for her to. Michael was not charged. His name was on some of those papers, and there were nights I was afraid for my son. But he came forward on his own, handed over the page he'd carried against his chest for a week, and told the truth even when it cost him his marriage and cracked his life wide open. A man who finds his courage late is still a man who found it. He and Cody live near me now. Some evenings the 3 of us sit at my kitchen table, sand in the hull of an old rowboat I dragged home from an estate sale, and Cody works the edges the way I taught him, and I watch my son watch his son, and I think Ellen would finally be able to breathe. Kate and I had our reckoning too, the one we promised each other that night. It didn't close in a single conversation. 6 years doesn't. It closed slowly, over months of Sunday calls, until the day I finally said out loud and all the way that my need for peace had cost him more than it ever cost me, and that I'd spend whatever I had left making it right. She forgave me, not because I'd earned it, but because she decided, somewhere along the way, that she'd rather have a father than be right about one. She got that from her mother, and Ellen. I talked to her most mornings, out on the porch, coffee going cold. I tell her the boxes are unpacked. I tell her our girl came home. I tell her that the walls she built held, and that the part she couldn't finish, the part that needed a living man to stand up out his own chair and walk out into the cold, got finished after all, late and clumsy and only just in time. People hear this story and think it's about revenge. It isn't. It's about the difference between peace and silence, which I was 68 years old before I finally learned. Silence is what they wanted from me. Peace is the other thing, the thing you only get on the far side of finally saying the hard sentence out loud. I said nothing at that table, not because I was beaten. I said nothing because, for the first time in 2 years, I understood that I had something worth protecting, and someone worth becoming. And then I stood up, and I walked out into the cold, and I made the call that gave me back my life.